Right, well, today, a special guest, I've got Mini Kingman. Hello, Mini.
Hello.
So, look, there's a traditional first question, which is, what do you do?
Well, as it is your traditional first question, I've put a bit of thought into this, and I thought, like everybody, I do a lot of things. But if I was on desert island discs, and of all the things I do, I could just take one thing with me, I think that would be being an occultist,
Okay,
first and foremost.
okay. So, I'm always interested when people, they say what they do, is
Mm.
obviously where they started that journey from.
Yeah.
Um, how how young were you before you realized there was something different? There was something hidden, if you like.
Sure. Yeah, very young, really. Probably, I mean, my earliest memory of looking into the other side, or being aware that there was something that I couldn't explain or couldn't be explained to me was at the age of about 8. And I think at the age of about 8, you're starting to externalize into the world and starting to really push out into things that explore things that you're curious about, or things that pique your curiosity. Um, and a lot of it was informed by my reading. I was reading before I went to school. My mum had time, as I was the eldest child, to to teach me reading and writing. So I was reading and writing before I started school age about 4, because I was early to school. Um, but once I'd read a few books and looked at a few things, it was about the age of 8 that things started sort of manifesting that I couldn't really describe. So I would see visions and
Okay.
ghosts and have
Uh,
these sort of spiritual experiences in nature as well.
Okay, so what were they like? Because it's interesting because I had a lot of stuff like that when I was younger. And and I think it's interesting when you're that young.
Yeah,
Part of it is like it's it's as real as your reality in many cases, isn't it? When you're that young.
it is. And I think also, as we all are, a product of my generation. So sort of this was the early 70s.
Mm,
And around me, because my parents were pretty progressive, which is fantastic, and I'm sure I'll talk a little about them shortly.
mm,
But there was things like Dennis Wheatley books lying around, and odd headlines in tabloid newspapers, and that sort of thing, and people. There was a huge upsurge of interest in otherworldly matters at
mm.
that time. And my grandfather certainly was an influence. I remember a book called Not of This World that he had. It's similar to Eric von Daniken's sort of
Yeah.
uh, alien thing going on.
Mm,
But there were lots of different introductions to the other world coming through various media and
mm,
music
mm.
at the time.
Yeah, there was. There was a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. Um, so that's interesting. So you're picking that up. Um, I would I'm going to just sort of throw something in here because this is something that I noticed particularly with my children, and then I've seen it again with the grandchildren. That their consciousness is like it's difficult. You can see that they're they're sort of dreaming while they're awake.
Yes, definitely. Waking dreams,
Yeah.
very much so. And I think you were saying about influences. Frankly, I think I was even being influenced by music
Mm.
primarily even before I was 8. So my dad and my mum both had some fantastic albums that were coming out during the late 60s, early 70s. And they influenced me very much, particularly my dad's great affinity to Pink Floyd that started even before The Dark Side of the Moon. So I was being inculcated with nursery rhymes written by Syd Barrett.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something
That
different.
very, very much influenced my interest in mysticism,
Mm,
for want of a better word.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
So
mm.
music as
Yeah,
well.
that's interesting because when I think back to uh, the experience that I had with music early on, just about everything had some sort of slightly mystical aspect to it, whether you were listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or you were listening to Pink Floyd,
Yeah.
or Genesis, or whatever. There was something going on there, and it's well, obviously Black Sabbath. I mean, God's sake. I mean,
Well,
Led Zeppelin. It was
going
it was it was
darker side.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
It
was
was
everything.
absolutely everywhere.
And prog rock was very much something that I was brought up with. So my dad was a Pink Floyd freak, and my uncle David, his older brother, took me to gigs fairly early on. So in my early teens, I was going to see Camel in Poole. Yes. And then he took me when I was aged just turned 14 to see the most extraordinary um, musician who I've always admired and now know, which is fabulous, which is Steve Hackett. And he really had this otherworldly
Hmm.
uh, thing about him. And I was like, crikey, who is this being playing this extraordinary, for me, extraordinarily transformative melodies?
Hmm.
And again, that sort of took me to the next level of my mystical journey. So it
Hmm.
has been musically informed, I think. Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely.
That's fascinating. Um, I'm just sort of I'm just sort of thinking that you were saying that because it was sort of everywhere, that stuff, and it was like I was going to say it was sort of hidden in plain sight, but it wasn't even really hidden um, at all.
No, it
And
was
I'm
fairly
just
fast.
and these things actually have a cyclic thing, don't they? Anyway, you sort of sort of think about what was going on with like sort of late Victorian, early Edwardian.
Well, it's
Uh,
fun to say that. Yeah.
yeah, because it was that was whether that was sort of mysticism coming from the East or whether it was spiritualism coming from America. It was just embedded within culture, and you would get people, politicians, and one of the top QC in Britain was a Buddhist. Christmas Humphreys was a Buddhist, and you sort of think, oh, that was just like, it's sort of hard to wrap your head around, you
It
know.
is. I think that's really interesting about you saying it's hidden in plain sight because
Mm,
it took me many years of assiduous study and curiosity to work through
mm,
the all the multifarious lines of curiosity, if you like, when it comes to these things. Um, and I think it wasn't until the mid to late 90s that I was introduced by a friend of mine to what we now know as the corpus of the occult renaissance, the magical renaissance that's going on right now. And it's fantastic to have grown up with that and
mm,
grown through with that from the sort of mid 90s onwards for me via the gateway drug of the Invisibles comics,
mm,
via the burgeoning chaos magic movement going
mm,
on,
mm.
uh, and of course rave culture as well, which was synonymous for me.
Yes.
It's
Again, hidden in plain sight.
absolutely so trance. Yeah, totally trance. I mean,
LLF.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
indeed.
that altered state of consciousness that you can get from that
Mm,
kind of thing. And it's funny because I guess I was brought up with psychedelia
mm.
mainly. My mum particularly was very much into more psychedelic stuff, very much a maverick musically, which later in life I came to really respect. So there was that, and then there was sort of this 80s thing that went on
Mm.
where I disconnected from music and basically discovered the blues, which again has that
Oh, yeah.
essence. That's really where it comes from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So through
Again,
the
hidden in
there was
plain
that.
sight.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And then in the 90s, the rave scene picked up that psychedelic current, and I think that was very influential.
Mm,
Um, so yes, one day a friend of mine, Hans, a German chap that I knew through the Invisibles scene, and a chap that I knew called Rob, they were practicing magicians, and I said, what's all this then? Because I didn't realize I knew, but I knew, if you know what.
mm, mm.
I was curious, and he handed me two books, and I said, I don't want these back. These are gifts. And on my left hand was Libanul and Psychonaut, and in my right hand was the White Goddess.
Mm.
And so these two tomes literally influenced two spirits that I engage with, and I've kind of called them rather prosaically Tom and Emily.
Mm.
So they're the kind of the two parts of who I am, I feel. But there's certainly spirits that I work with. Tom is very mercurial. For me, he's Mr. Punch, the Harlequin,
Mm.
the Hermes, the whole
Mm.
fluid essence. And,
Mm.
and I've always struggled with Tom because, he's Tommy, he's Major Tom,
Yeah.
it goes on. Um, and then there's the more feminine side. Emily is Venus, and she's what I grew up with. It's funny you say about Edwardian influence, because I think that Edwardian influence that came back into play in the early 70s and the 60s was very big for me. So to see Emily play was playing
Yeah, yeah,
quite
exactly.
literally in my household all the time.
Mm.
And then on the telly, you had Emily and her saggy old cloth cat.
Yes. Yeah,
And
Bagpuss.
then
I'm
my
assuming it's
books,
Bagpuss, is it?
Emily Bronte, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to just be the name Emily, but it works.
Mm.
She is Kate Bush, she is
Mm.
Alice in Wonderland.
Mm.
It's that certain essence of Victorian
Mm.
English Rose.
And of
So
course, you mentioned about the Diary of the Edwardian Lady, and you look at that, and you've also got Laura Ashley, and all those sort of.
yes,
It was
all of that.
all of that.
Absolutely.
Is
Holly
absolutely.
Hobby,
Yeah.
I grew up with Laura Ashley, making beautiful rag dolls with pinafore dresses. It was that entire aesthetic. I call it aesthetic, but it's more than that. It's a
Well, sort of a zeitgeist, isn't it?
it
It's a channel.
was and is, and it completely flows through me.
Mm.
That side of the two spirits. But yeah, so Libanel, the chaos magician, the chaos stuff was kind of a bit freaky and
Mm.
psychedelic, and I didn't understand that. And then you had the White Goddess, which later was very much, you know,
Mm.
poo-pooed by scholarship, but I think it still holds
Yeah, but the
weight
thing is,
as a myth, and mythology
yes,
doesn't
yes.
necessarily have to stand up to scholarly
It's a story.
assessment in order to be of value.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is about stories is that stories are real, but they're not real in the way that we understand real, if you see what I mean. They're not, so they're a functioning thing that does stuff. And you see that with song. I've mentioned this before. You see it with songs that seem to have a life force of their own, where they sort of mutate, become something else. And it's the same with stories.
Yeah,
Obviously, Greek myths are a great example of that because they're just as relevant now when you listen to them. They're still talking about the human condition now. And
yeah,
you think, well, these have been spoken, and same with the Norse myths. They're talking about flows of consciousness that are in us and probably in animals as well. Um, they could spot that. Because we're so detached and we have this sort of mental thing that we've sort of evolved. You see what I
mm,
mean? Non
mm.
transcendental aspect. We sort of lose sight of the thing. Well, that sort of information is sort of obvious to people who live close to the earth because that's how they lived.
Yeah, and it's that rewilding, and
Yeah, yeah, it is.
definitely the pandemic. You say about my sort of occult transitioning. That there's lots to tell, but the most to bring things bang up to date. I think that just before the pandemic, that was when I decided to come away from my books, come away from the internet, come away from the TV, just before the pandemic kicked in, and actually get out there. And
Mm.
the first time I did that was it doesn't seem like magical practice, but it's part of me that's an activist. So Grenfell Tower, the the
Right.
the night I watched that unfolding, awful night, that early evening into the night. And that was the time that I thought that was my red line. Enough is enough. And yeah, I got up and I was a political activist for a few years, and continue to
Mm.
try to help out where I can. But then the pandemic happened, and during lockdown, again, I was getting up and getting out. And in that way, that wasn't about the human side of things or the socio-political side of how we're evolving at a rate of knots right now and changing. Um, this was about going back to land. So I live in Poole in Dorset. I always have. I sort of say that I've got Poole Harbour seawater flowing through my veins. And literally, I work in the centre of the harbour now on Brownsea Island, which is very magical in itself. But there are in the town, there are pathways and public pathways that I hadn't really explored. You never fully explore that is right on your doorstep, and certainly that was a re-enchantment
Mm.
with the land here and the sea that I hadn't experienced since I was about 8 years
Mm.
old.
Mm.
I
That's
went
an interesting point.
Yeah, I had a very out of body experience, a really extraordinary one. Well, in body experience actually, if you see what I mean, because I went down to my local White Cliff Park, my local swings
Mm.
that I'd always played down there, and it overlooks the harbour, which is wonderful. So you can swing and look out to sea. I mean, how lovely is that? And I had a really strange experience. It was a sunny day, and there were some yachts because we were just starting to open up after the first lockdown. There were very, very few cars on the road, on the Sandbanks Road, the main road through to Sandbanks, which is usually chock-a-block. There was a certain quietness and stillness amongst the people around, gentleness. And I suddenly sort of closed into myself and I was literally 6, 7, 8 years old again.
Mhm.
The smell of the sea, the
Yep.
sounds of very few cars, that strange silence, but just interspersed with a few cars. Because back in the 70s, that was probably, it
Mm,
must have been how it was then. And it transported me back.
mm, mm,
Sense what
mm,
I was hearing, smelling, seeing,
mm,
touching, the whole lot. It was an extraordinary experience.
mm, mm.
So yeah,
Because I think a lot of people experience things that are unusual like that, but they just sort of don't really notice them. But they sort of notice them, but they sort of don't don't value them in hindsight. They just think it's just something and it just passes them by. But I think these things are actually really important, um, because it sort of points out the sort of timeless nature of existence. That certainly when you have, um, for want of a better word, a spiritual experience. It's not probably the right word, but you know what I mean. It's the sort of thing that people have that can change the direction of their life. They often involve things like that, where there is some sort of time distortion or sensory distortion in some way, where certain things are heightened and other things are diminished
mm,
in that moment. And I think I'm just trying to think who was it William James? I think it was William James who wrote a lot about people's spiritual experiences, and I think that's that sort of again, I think that's more common than people realize, just generally, because if you talk to people, they'll say, "Oh, I had something really weird happen."
yeah,
A
yeah,
lot of people will talk about it, but they won't share it because they think they'd be sort of ridiculed or whatever. In
yeah.
actual fact, I think it's very, very common. And
And I
those sort of things are transformative, aren't they? They change you in that moment if you allow them to. Yeah, that's interesting. That now, there's something else I think is I'd like to, because obviously you've spoken to me about what you used to do as a job, your father having a,
yeah, 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 yeah. My
and
dad is a big influence on me.
yeah, yeah, and what fascinated me was that you've often been in a male world, right? And this has happened a number of times. I'm sure you're probably aware of it. I'm afraid,
Painfully so sometimes, yes.
sorry.
But painfully so sometimes,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
quite often
yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's not
not
easy.
bad. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So a lot of your early work then you're working for
So
your
I,
dad's
yeah,
business.
I worked my my family, my paternal family were all my grandfather and his father before him, and my dad and his brothers, my uncles, were all engineers and draftsmen. So they were very innovative. My
Mm,
grandfather, um, um, my uncles, yeah, particularly, were very creative with what they did. Um, so that element was interesting. I worked from the family business for from 87 to 1987 to 2003, so a long time.
right,
And of all things, we made compression molded bottle caps made of like bakelite material.
right.
So
Yeah.
a very sort of primitive polymer, if you like, but actually, funnily enough, environmentally friendly because
Yeah.
it's nitrogenous. It breaks
Yeah.
down.
Very STEM,
Yeah. Um, and so my dad was brilliant. He taught me the fine art of negotiation and how to do a deal and how
yeah.
to weigh stuff up. And as you, I think you were saying the other day, we talk about this about doing a fag packet
Calculation, yeah.
calculation and yeah, and he always said to me, never gamble what you can't afford to lose, which I think
Yes.
is a great
Wise words.
maxim for life. Whatever you're gambling, whatever you're willing to sacrifice, has to
Mm.
be something
Because
that,
because we were sort of discussing, there's a friend of mine that fits that bill perfectly,
mm,
and there are certain traits which I think are important for people to adopt. Because I'm looking at, I started working on another book which is about, well, it's for basically for musicians, but it could be for anybody who's in the arts really. And there's this thing about the entrepreneurial way of seeing things and dealing with stuff. And there are certain key elements. One of those is this sort of guesstimate, the ability to guesstimate something. So you have a rough idea of how something works. And that's the fag packet thing. And
yeah,
I've seen this happen with people who are great with money and they can just quickly calculate what the profit margin is like that.
yeah.
It's not difficult to do, but it's just being able to have the mindset to do it, isn't it?
I think it's intuitive.
Yeah,
A part of it is intuitive.
which is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, because not everybody has that quality. They have the opposite qualities, if you like, if you want to sort of get Jungian or Myers-Briggsy about it. So yeah, gut feeling
Yes,
um,
yes,
is
it is
is
a gut feeling.
always operated. My father
So
was,
what I'm looking at there, and this is what I see like a little thread that sticks, that's sort of in music, and it's in that sort of ability of a really good businessman to see the entrepreneurial businessman. I'm not talking about somebody who just happens to be the managing director of, Glaxo, whatever. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people who can see opportunity in things. That instinctive thing, because that is very similar to the person who gets a hunch about something, which is, could be somebody involved in, I don't know, tarot reading or something like that. It's that sort of thing.
yeah,
There's a very similar vibe to that.
very,
And yeah, that's, so I'm looking at that and thinking, well, there are certain elements to that where people can, and if you're dealing, and I'm writing this book for musicians, so if they're contemporary musicians, they're playing electric guitar and stuff, they should be able, they should be able to have a hunch about things because the music's that type of music is much more about, you know, feeling where the song's going and feeling about what the vibe of the song is and the rest of it.
yeah. It's interesting because I there is a difference, and again, there's a sort of a
Okay, let me put it this way.
yeah,
The type of musicians like that would be the Peter Gabriels, the Muddy Waters, the people who, the Dr. Johns,
mm,
these sort of people who
mm,
just
mm.
know, the Stevie Wonders, the Jeff Becks. They're probably not. They're probably not the Phil Collins, and they're probably not, the,
Mm.
maybe Tony Banks or whatever. They're the people that there's some people it's quite academic.
Yeah,
Right? There'd be a lot of classical musicians that would fit into that, but not all of them. So, you know, certainly conducting, great conductors, probably aren't. They're probably more instinctive because there's something that's quite ephemeral about. Even though all that stuff's in front of them, they are adding something that's different. There's this that the sort of Jacqueline Dupre player.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's that sort of instinctive.
You've
You know,
got the muse,
yes,
and then you've got the music, and then
yes,
the two come together, and it's about
yes.
this is where I've really struggled through life, funnily enough, is these two sides of me, which is one is about commodification, because we all have to earn a living, and run a business and learn how to run a business, etc. And then there's been the artistic side of me.
Mm,
So that has been if you like, channeled via my absolute lifelong interest in other states of consciousness and the occult and all that sort of thing, magical practice and study. And I find it very, very difficult to do art for literally for art's sake.
Yes.
You know, that climb Everest because it's there.
Mm.
And I think I've always sort of been brought up to think there's got to be a point. And I'm learning at a very late stage of my life that sometimes the journey
Yeah.
is much more important than the destination. And so that's been a very recent transformation and transition that I've gone through.
Yeah.
And I thank my mentor, Julian Vane, who's been my teacher and my sort of mentor for the last knocking on 15, maybe more years. He has helped me to overcome, dare I say it, the good old standby imposter syndrome,
Oh, yes.
where
That's very common.
I
Oh my
I
God.
like to the entrepreneurial side of me likes to
Yeah.
introduce people, see the patterns, do the negotiation, say, oh, so and so, you might like so and so. You could create a synergy, and I've been very external. And it's only been recently that I've allowed myself to give myself permission to be an artist.
Mm.
I still
Mm.
find, you can see, I still find that difficult to say. But
Yeah, but the thing is, I like Alan Moore's thing. I woke up one morning and decided I should have a midlife crisis. But it would be good
I'm having a
it would be good
late
to,
life
yeah, it,
crisis.
yeah. But I mean, Alan Moore's thing was like, yeah, but I didn't want to do anything sort of boring, so I decided that I would be a magician, and that's sort of because that would cause people a lot of anxiety. And I thought that's quite a good sort of thing that you can just decide that you're going to be something. And then as
Yeah.
soon as you've
Well,
decided that that's what you are, then that's what you are. You don't necessarily have to have a piece of paper and a qualification. I mean, okay, nobody's going to wake up and say, I'm now going to be a brain surgeon. We're talking about, we're talking about the arts.
mm,
But um, but the problem is that because the way that we're educated into things, we think that we have to always prove ourselves.
yes, my education was very much like that. Art and music were not.
Yeah.
They were certainly seen. I feel definitely seen as secondary
Yes.
pursuits.
And you had a good education, right?
I did. I had a very
And
privileged
unfortunately, those
start.
establishments are probably the worst for doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not
So
all of them, but
now
a
I'm
lot.
catching up.
The music is just looked upon as a secondary thing, you know. Um, but which is unfortunate, really,
I
because
think it's
obviously,
tragic, and I think it's
and it is.
actually not doing the world a lot of favors right
No,
now.
of course it isn't. The
You
thing
can
that
see that transition in place
yeah,
already. Um, what I'm loving is the fact that the occult community is now bringing its ideas and thoughts to the fore. I'll cite a couple of things recently that I've been involved with, which was or went to, which was an exhibition by the Order of the Sun and the Moon, which is Julian Vane's collaborative thing that he did recently.
mm,
And funnily enough, his friend Greg Humphreys, fabulous artist and tutor, said to me, I said, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist." He said, "Hold on a minute." He said, "If you're um, changing a washer on a tap, you're being a plumber at that time."
mm, Certainly.
Um, and if you're doing your job, you're being a retailer or a
Hmm.
housekeeper or whatever.
Exactly.
When you're drawing, or doing or creating, you're being an artist.
Exactly.
And it was that simple validation, if you like, or explanation that has really helped me to overcome that lack of confidence.
Hmm.
And ever since, it's been the last 6 months, I've been out the blocks
Yeah.
at a very late stage. But then I thought of Alfred Wallace down in Cornwall, the Newlyn School,
Yeah.
who, as you know, at the age of 70 something, started to get his paints out, and he left an incredible legacy
Hmm.
artistically. I wouldn't, I don't doubt that, I doubt that I would ever do something like
Yeah, but you don't know. And I think the thing is,
something.
why
Sorry?
he didn't know that it was going to leave a
No,
legacy.
absolutely. No, he was doing it because it was there. And I think
Exactly.
it's that enjoyment and sheer pleasure in creating and being authentic to yourself with your interests that's
We,
important.
I think going back to this sort of thing about you being in a man's world, obviously with business and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
You also did that with because you were involved in a lot of sort of prog rock stuff, right?
yeah, yeah,
Which you
yeah.
haven't sort of really said.
Mm.
And from the point of view of, ferrying people backwards and forwards to gigs and goodness knows what else, that's interesting because that environment is very male dominated.
It
Um,
is. I mean, there's an in joke that women have a great fun at prog rock concerts, mainly because the queue for the loo is
yes,
unusually short
unusually short. Yeah,
versus
exactly.
versus guys. Um, the one that it's ironic about prog because actually it's called progressive rock, but it's arguably the most regressive
Yeah, it is.
socially,
I
um,
think so.
which is a shame. But at the same time, there is some fantastic new uh, bands and musical ideas coming out from that original 70s
Mm.
canon, if you like. The thing that I find extraordinary is that it's, for me, Emily music. It's very
Yeah,
beautiful,
yeah,
it's very complex. It's like a stunningly detailed
yeah.
embroidered cloth or tapestry or what have you. So I find it incredibly beautiful music, melodic, etc. But it is odd that women generally haven't taken to it. I love the fact that it speaks of the divine feminine, if you like, with small d and f, to a male
Yeah,
uh, audience, which I think is good because it's very emotional, can be very
mm,
emotional. I've seen, lots of tears at gigs. That's the good bit. The more challenging area is the Me Too, post Me Too
yeah,
reflections that a lot of us have had. And a few years ago, not too long ago, a few women that I know in the both working in the industry and as fans and artists, etc., people who are literally driving the operations usually as tour managers, merch, that sort of thing. Um, we kind of got together and exchanged notes on quite unpleasant experiences that we've had.
mm,
Um, whether that's a rather sort of patronizing
yeah,
interaction or actually, as we exchanged screenshots of highly aggressive interactions as well, which has been very upsetting. And yeah, we again, the activist in me, we wrote letters to Prog magazine, and Jerry Ewing, a wonderful friend of mine, and a wonderful guy, really championed this this cause of that we had, and it's very important to talk about misogyny in the music industry.
Yeah.
We were looking at it from the prog perspective, but
Yeah.
enough, as soon as we started talking about it on the BBC, there were folk music women in the folk music industry starting to say things aren't as rosy as they
No.
might. So
No.
there's a
But I
lot.
think in actual fact, there's a lot of stuff that goes back to attitudes in the 60s and 70s that seem to be quite
Still
okay
prevalent.
when they were not okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and they are still prevalent, and I have
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
data on that. Yeah, yeah. Which is,
So, yeah, well,
it's worthy of being challenged, and now is the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's sort of, I find that quite interesting that you've sort of woven the part, that's a really quite unusual path through things, because you obviously had to be incredibly confident to be able to deal with the type of people that you were getting, like when you were working and all the rest of it. And I think it's interesting that you obviously you're now writing a lot of poetry and doing a lot of artwork.
Yeah.
And I'm always interested with people who come to that much, sort of later on, because for a lot of people, they okay, I get, I've made a living with the born again guitarists. You know what I mean? Um, people, people have been playing three chords for the last 30 years. Suddenly decide that they need to play some more.
Well, that's
Um,
great. That's
I know,
fast.
I know. It is. I'm just, you know, but I am always interested when people discover something about themselves later on that is transformative,
Yeah.
because it's not about. Although I've seen people go on tours and do all this sort of thing later, and they didn't expect that was going to happen. But generally, it's about just getting out and playing and doing things that you thought, I never did this when I was a teenager,
Mhm.
you know, or in my 20s. And now they're doing it. They're doing it later on, and I think that's marvelous. I think it's brilliant, and I think that's really important for people because
It is.
I've had a number of doctors who learn a musical instrument later on saying this should be on the National Health Service
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
because it is so good for people. I had one person say to me, playing the guitar has stopped me having another nervous breakdown. And
Mm,
he was a doctor.
that's wonderful.
And that's the sort of thing that really
Valuable.
we really need to for people to understand the power of it. It's not just music, it's art as well. It's
Mm.
that sort of thing of finding something in yourself and not trying to be somebody else, just discovering yourself through something. I think it's really important. And you can do that when you get older.
You can. I think certainly from my perspective, and I'm sure from many people's perspectives, it's that thing about wanting to give.
Yeah. Giving something back.
Yeah, yeah, but also wanting to recognize others
Yes.
almost to one's own detriment. And so one loses one's identity, is in
That was
danger
what you mean. Yeah, 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 yeah. Get that. Yeah.
of identity in being so modest, over modest, if you like. I find it terribly difficult to go, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the thing,
Yeah.
Um, or even to say I am doing the thing.
Yeah.
It goes against one's the values that one has been brought up with.
Yeah.
But there does come a time when you have to think, right, let's stop a minute. What really is important
Mm.
to me? Let's forget about everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
He's
how am I going
self-indulgent
to,
in that for a
yeah,
change. You know.
yeah. And how am I going to express that?
Mm.
So that's where I'm at kind of now. It's a wonderful thing, and it's sort of bringing my interest in other states of consciousness and all of that hocus pocus stuff. It's giving a new channel for it for me.
Yeah.
Some people have been doing it many, many years, and I haven't, and I'm finding that incredibly rewarding,
Mm. Mm.
revealing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm writing. I've been doing a lot of printmaking at uni, at my local uni. Watercolors, just starting to be the person I always wanted to be.
Mm. That's
You know?
great.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, it makes me smile. I'm smiling.
Well, that's good. That's good. I think that's the you know, that sort of transformative aspect, because really that's sort of what's hidden within, spiritual traditions. It's about transformation. But of course, we always then sort of pigeonhole something, that means it's like, oh yeah, you can do this, and if you follow a particular philosophy or something like that, you just put that in a little box to do with that way of thinking. Whether you're a Buddhist and it's going to be your meditation or whatever.
Yeah,
You often get that thing, but okay, the Buddhists get that, where you can just be meditating while you're peeling the potatoes, type of thing, or sweet. But we don't really take that seriously. Really take that seriously, and thinking actually that transformative thing is in everything we do. It's writing a poem, or it's doing a watercolor, or it's writing a song, or it's just making up some jokes or something. Anything that's just you being in the world and doing something, giving something to the world that wasn't there before you know you did it. You put that in there, and I think the reality of stuff, because people sort of think, well, so, the only reason we know anything about the past is because somebody did something artistic. They either wrote a story about it,
pretty
or they
much.
or they painted pictures on the walls to commemorate something that somebody did. The thing that person did was absolutely and utterly pointless, whether it was Ramesses or whatever, because somebody else came along and nicked all the territory again. But that artistic representation of them is what gives us depth of our understanding of
Mm.
human civilization and the rest of it. That's how important art is. It
Yeah.
is the very thing that gives us an understanding of ourselves. And, okay, the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Syrians did a lot of stuff about accountancy on their little clay tablets.
Sure did.
But they were also writing extraordinary stories as well. Um, and I think that is the thing. There's a functionality that we need. Obviously, if you're running a civilization, we need to go out and sell things, which is what you've done for most of your life, right? But at the same point, we need to tell stories about themselves. Otherwise, there is no culture.
Yeah, and it's of equal, if not more
Well,
value.
I think you can't do any mathematics about how much rice there is and all the rest of it if you haven't got a culture anyway. It's as simple as that. The culture's got to come before
Mm.
the administration. And we've been doing it for ages. We've been, making designs on rocks and stuff for
Mm.
some reason. We were telling stories. And I think that is important. And that's really what we are, in my opinion. That's what we are. That's what makes us human.
Yeah.
And
Because creativity creates a version of reality. And I think this is where we've, as a species, have sort of come away from that, that there are multiple ways of looking and engaging with the world and the other world that
Exactly.
has only been lost fairly recently.
Yes. Well, it's
Um,
still under the surface. Because again, if you go back to what we were saying about people having unusual experiences when you talk to people, then a lot of people go, yeah, that was sort of strange. I don't understand that. Or, a lot of weird stuff used to happen to my uncle.
yeah.
That type of thing.
And
You know,
what's wonderful is that science and archaeological technology, particularly, um, is starting to catch up.
mm,
So all of a sudden, there is intense scholarly interest in esoteric matters.
yeah,
That's fantastic. I would never have dreamt that that would have happened back in the 1990s, let
no,
alone before that. So the scholars are starting, the academia and the establishment is starting to talk to the magicians. And it's not just about empirical matters, it's about experiential
yeah.
matters.
Well, that's the thing. There is a shift in anthropology towards not
Totally.
not trying to just understand something from a colonial perspective.
It,
You know,
that's got a huge amount to do with this. Yeah, I
yeah,
get that. I
yeah,
get that.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's really important. And that's the point of that. This you cannot understand somebody's existence without actually understanding how they think. In other words, not from a stand back point of view.
Yeah,
You've got to be in their experience to understand.
totally. Yeah, yeah.
Um, because obviously our reality that we think is real is so limited. It's really mostly made up by our own senses anyway. And I think that's the thing all the time that you think. And I always think jazz is a great example of this. It's like, you got all these notes that fit the key, and then some guy can play a whole load of notes that don't fit, and it sounds absolutely fucking amazing. You sort of think,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, how did that work? So
Exactly. Somebody at a very, oh, crumbs, somebody said to me, how to understand jazz. Believe in the beat,
yeah,
then you'll get it.
yeah. Well, it is actually all about where the notes fall, because you can play a whole bunch of notes off the beat and they sound great, and they're all the wrong notes.
Can, but it comes back to,
Yeah, and then you land on the beat on the right note, and it's good. And that's the sort of thing. There's such a lot of interesting things within art that you understand a lot about how we see the world and how we're the illusion of reality, because art's playing with that all the time. In fact, I do this quite a lot when I teach kids, just kids, adults, where you can play a note and that note stops, but they can still sense that note over a melody. So the melody doesn't sound like it's on its own. It sounds like it's got a chord behind it, but the chord's not there. It's just that you've set up that note. And it happens in classical guitar quite a lot, because obviously you haven't got enough fingers to put all the notes there. But it's just that sort of thing of like, just because something has disappeared in sound doesn't mean to say it's not there in your mind.
yeah.
And
And
it's
that's the big question. Where is that?
exactly, well, yeah. But
We'll
this is,
never know.
no, exactly. Exactly.
But it's really good fun trying to find out.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I think the what you're talking about coming to art. Well, it's not because you didn't do art before, but it's actually recognizing how much art that you have is a really important thing. And I think it's really important for people that are older, because I see things with people that that if they've got onset Alzheimer's or something like that, if they were to learn things like poetry,
Mm.
that has a delaying effect to mental conditions. I mean, if you think about a lot of these aged actors, They don't have a problem. Their mental health is astonishing. They're not struggling with forgetting things. They're just amazing because what they're doing all the time is just learning lots of text. But again, that's the same with notes. If you're learning a piece of music. So there are lots of very famous cases of great concert pianists. Rubinstein was the one that sticks out in my mind. He was in his 90s and somebody signed him up for a 5-year record deal when he
Mm.
was 91, I think.
Mm.
I, you know, it's incredible, wasn't it? That somebody could,
A lot of value
yes, that's the point.
in the sum of one's experience and then transferring those skills, using transferable skills to
Yes,
explore
yes,
a different
yeah,
skill or develop a different skill set. Um, and it's surprising how much you know or you can do naturally,
yes,
having experienced so many different works of art and so many different books and poems and as I kind of say, I'm starting at a very late age to become a cultural producer from having spent a lifetime as a cultural consumer.
right. That's an
Love
interesting point.
taking it all in, consuming it, not just materially or financially, but absorbing and subsuming all the things that one enjoys artistically and otherwise. But then to start producing oneself, once you get over that hurdle of self-doubt, lack of confidence, imposter syndrome, etc., that's an illusion.
Yeah,
And
it is an illusion because all
only,
the great players are like it as well.
yeah,
They all think they're imposters.
yeah. I know.
I tell you one. I'll tell
It's
you a story.
it doesn't help
No,
when it's you.
no, but here's a good one. Um, Sam Kelly is a really well-known drummer. Sam was telling me that he used to work with Gary Moore,
Yeah,
and I can't remember. Gary Moore used to sort of doodle around and play a little bit of jazz, and all this sort of thing. And Sam said, "You should you should just take this out as like a little trio. It'd be brilliant." And Gary Moore was like, "I can't do that." And he said, "Why not?" He said, "Because somebody might realise I can't play jazz." And it's like, what? Because he was an imposter.
mm,
You sort of think, well, if Gary Moore, you could, I've heard Gary Moore play jazz stuff, and it's like, well, you wouldn't think he's an imposter, but
no,
he thought he was.
yeah. It's about how one feels about oneself.
Absolutely. And if you think, and he's not the only one that top sort of player that you hear something, you think, right, yeah, all right then, you know. So it's everybody's got it.
Yeah.
Everybody's got that sort of thing that they can't just go and do something because they'll
Mm,
be found out. It's quite funny. So
yeah, and
yeah, it's all
this
nonsense.
thing as well of this expression "fake it till you make it," I struggle with because one's values are integrity, honesty.
Yeah, but come on, what's that about? I mean, it's an interesting point that where did that come from? I mean, as long as you're nice to people and all the rest of it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and you do your best, that's integrity, right?
yeah.
But we're sort of thinking integrity is, well, what is that about? If you're an
Mm,
artist, do you have to have a degree in art? I mean, that's not, that's one of those things I think is tricky because on the face of it, it's a good idea. But when you sort of dig a little bit deeper, you think, well, actually, I've taken that on from somewhere. I'm
yeah.
not saying that you cheat, but
Oh, I get that, and it's
in a
about
in a way, yeah, maybe I could say, sort of from a mercurial thing, maybe you should cheat, um, because there is something about when things get fixed like that, and that's why the revolutionary sort of artists tend to be the ones who got kicked out of art college.
yeah, because they're going against the grain.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with the type of thing that the people that are teaching them were doing.
Yeah, like a echo chamber.
It is. It is like an echo chamber. So, if something that's going to be revolutionary, it's got to come from somewhere else. So, and I'm just wondering whether integrity comes from a training of something that makes you think in a particular way. I'm not saying completely, but there is something about that you think, well, it's quite a double-edged sword, this, because
It is. It is. And it's a sword of Damocles as well.
Yeah.
It's always there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Right, well.
But I'm working on it.
That's pretty good going. That's great, actually.
In progress.
There was some really good stuff then, Snowy. So, yeah. Well, it normally I'll put some show notes up. Might be interesting to, I don't know, you could pop some. Have you got your artwork somewhere or pictures of what you're doing?
Yeah, I'll pop a little bit
if
up.
you've got some site I can link to or something, that might be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And we've obviously glossed over a lot of your connections with some of the prog rock bands and stuff. We'll come back to at some point.
Sure.
But anyway, that was brilliant. Really nice. A lot of stuff in there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
That's all right. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. So we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.